Chapter 2. A Town is Born. In the early days, when visitors came to see Niagara Falls, it was a wild, natural spot. There were no buildings nearby. There was no bridge across the deep gorge, the valley between the cliffs. There were no stairs leading down to the river. Some men and women were adventurous, though. They wanted to see the falls from every side, even if it was dangerous. In the late 1700s, a few men hiked and climbed down the steep cliffs beside Niagara Falls. They wanted to see the waterfall from below. They climbed down a series of ladders that Native Americans had left behind. The ladders were just a series of tree trunks with tomahawk notches cut into them. When the men reached the bottom, they decided to walk behind the waterfall. Inching along, they made their way to the gap between the cliff wall and the sheet of water. But when they got there, they could hardly breathe. The spray was like being in a steam bath, and the wind from a cave behind the falls sucked all the air away. A few years later, in 1795, the wife of a Canadian governor wanted to climb down to the gorge. So, a better ladder was built for her. This one was just a bunch of logs tied together with grapevines. It dangled out from the edge of the cliff over the gorge. Some brave men were terrified at the thought of it. But the governor's wife climbed down it in a full floor-length skirts. Pretty soon, people were coming from all over to see Niagara Falls. Roads were built. Hotels were built. One man, Augustus Porter, bought a lot of land on the American side of the falls. He also bought Goat Island. He wanted to make sure it stayed wild and beautiful. Goat Island had been named after the goats that once lived there. The mist from the falls kept the plants fresh and green. Beautiful wildflowers and ferns grew everywhere. When other men wanted to build a tavern on Goat Island, Porter said no. He kept it natural so that people could enjoy it for many years to come. But the rest of the land near Niagara Falls was another story. Porter built a blacksmith shop, a tannery, and a tavern. He built a bridge to Goat Island and charged people to walk across it. He also built a sawmill that used the force of the falling water as power to run the saws. When Porter's daughter traveled to Europe on vacation, a man asked her if she had seen Niagara Falls. "I own them," she replied. The Hermit of Niagara. In 1829, a young man named Francis Abbott arrived at Niagara Falls on foot. He was carrying a flute, a book, and some blankets. After taking one look at the falls, he knew he couldn't leave. For many years, Augustus Porter let him live in an old log cabin on Goat Island. Abbott let his hair grow long and walked around in bare feet wrapped in a blanket. He didn't shave. Sometimes he wouldn't speak to people. He'd only write on a chalkboard. He wrote in his journals all the time and made drawings. Sometimes he shocked people by walking on a narrow wooden plank that led over the edge of the falls. He would hang by his hands over the falls for up to 15 minutes. Pretty soon, people began calling him the Hermit of Niagara. One day, after he'd been there 2 years, Abbott folded his clothes on the banks of the river below the falls. Then he climbed into the water. A ferry boatman saw him go under, but he never came back up. His body was found in the river 11 days later. When local people went back to his cabin, they found his dog guarding the door. Instead, inside were his musical instruments and blank pieces of paper. None of his drawings or writings was left behind. All that was left of the hermit were the stories people told about his strange life there. After he died, his favorite swimming spot near Goat Island was named Hermit's Cascade.